Welcome, future educational administrators. Today, we're getting right into the structural foundations, administrative evolution, and landmark policies of Indian school education. You're preparing for the tgpsc District Educational Officer exam, which means you cannot rely on loose summaries. We have to look at the exact empirical knowledge and constitutional frameworks you'll use to govern districts and implement state directives. Let's get started.
Our explainer today covers three precise areas. Chapter 1, Foundations of School Education, Chapter 2, Evolution and Administrative Structure, and Chapter 3, Growth Statistics and Programs.
Starting with Chapter 1, Foundations of School Education. We need to establish the absolute legal groundwork of the institutions you'll soon be administering.
So, what exactly makes a school legally valid under your jurisdiction? By legal definition, a recognized school has to strictly follow a course of study prescribed by the central or state government, a university, or a legally constituted board. It doesn't stop there. As an administrator, you have to make sure these institutions satisfy standard efficiency checks by supervisory bodies, like a directorate or a municipal corporation. They've got to conduct regular classes and legitimately send candidates for public exams. If a school misses these marks, it loses its legal standing, and it's your statutory duty to step in.
Now, a school obviously doesn't exist just to test students. Our framework has four distinct societal aims. First, developing democratic citizenship, which means cultivating clear thinking, community living, tolerance, social justice, and patriotism. Second, improving vocational efficiency. We want to promote the dignity of labor, build technical skills, and offer diversified courses to boost national productivity. Third is personality development, achieved by encouraging cultural appreciation, artistic interests, and creative hobbies. And fourth, developing the leadership qualities absolutely vital for our secular democracy. Every administrative decision you make has to align with these four pillars.
Moving on to Chapter 2, Evolution and Administrative Structure. Let's break down how these aims are constitutionally organized.
The bedrock of our formal schooling is the 12-year 10+2 structure, systematically divided into four distinct stages based on child development. We start with the primary stage, classes I through V for ages 6 to 11. That's followed by the upper primary or middle stage for classes 6 to 8, ages 11 to 14. Next up is the secondary stage, covering classes 9 and 10 for ages 14 to 15. Finally, we have the higher or senior secondary stage, classes 11 and 12 for ages 16 to 17. This final stage is crucial because it's where students branch off into specific academic or vocational streams. That choice directly shapes the workforce pipeline of your entire district.
Historically, education was strictly a state responsibility, but that changed fundamentally in 1976 with the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act. By moving education to the concurrent list, specifically List 3, Entry 25, the Constitution permanently altered your administrative hierarchy. It brought the center directly into the fold of school education. Understanding this legal pivot is absolutely essential for any district educational officer interpreting state versus federal mandates.
10 years later, the National Policy on Education in 1986 called this concurrency a meaningful partnership. So what does that actually mean for you at the state level? Well, the states retain executive control over daily administration, but the center takes on a macro-level mandate. They reinforce national integration, maintain quality standards, coordinate manpower planning, and promote overall excellence. You execute locally, they coordinate nationally. This dual mechanism governs literally every grant, scheme, and evaluation you'll oversee.
Let's look at Chapter 3, Growth Statistics and Programs. We're going to examine the empirical realities on the ground and the systemic interventions designed to manage them.
To really grasp your administrative burden, we need to look at systemic expansion. The 7th All India School Education Survey conducted by NCRT in 2002 recorded 1,031,367 schools. That is a massive 25.40% growth compared to the 6th survey just 9 years earlier in 1993. The physical footprint of our educational infrastructure expanded at an astonishing rate, bringing with it some serious logistical challenges.
When we break this growth down geographically, the specific challenges for district officers become incredibly clear. Rural schools expanded by 22.57%, hitting 853,457 institutions. At the exact same time, urban schools saw an explosive growth of nearly 41%, reaching 177,910. This unprecedented national scale-up dictates exactly where you have to direct your resources, anticipating both the density of urban migration and the vast, scattered needs of rural areas.
Enrollment figures completely mirror this physical expansion. By 2002, total school enrollment hit 282,513 pupils. Crucially, girls represented 45.31% of this total, meaning over 90.9 million female students were enrolled. In rural areas alone, girls' enrollment registered an incredible 66.23% increase. This systemic expansion was heavily backed by national policy directives committing a strict 6% of our gross domestic product to education, making sure at least half of that funding went straight to the primary sector.
Managing growth of this magnitude required highly targeted programs. Going back a bit, in 1974, the non-formal education subsystem was organized specifically for school dropouts, working children, and geographically isolated groups. Yet, physical deficits remained severe. By 1986, 16.27% of primary schools operated entirely without buildings. To fix this, the government introduced microplanning, a participative, child-wise and family-wise local action plan managed by village education committees to ensure regular attendance. Concurrently, following the 1986 policy, Operation Blackboard was launched in 1987.
Operation Blackboard legally mandated 3 non-negotiable physical minimums for primary schools. You need to commit these to memory. First, every school must have at least 2 large all-weather rooms. Second, there must be at least 2 teachers per school, with a strict preference that one of them be female. And third, the provision of minimum essential teaching-learning materials. As an officer, enforcing these exact minimums across your district is your baseline duty.
Fast forward to 1994, and the district primary education program decentralized our primary reconstruction from the bottom up. It specifically targeted disadvantaged areas, successfully covering 219 districts across 15 states by the year 2000. But look, infrastructure alone isn't enough if actual learning is absent. That's why the minimum levels of learning framework was introduced. It shifted our policy focus away from just counting enrollments to ensuring competency-based instruction and outcomes, using continuous and comprehensive evaluation to measure real academic success. All these foundational programs culminated in the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, or SSA, in 2001, targeting primary completion by 2007 and elementary by 2010. SSA strictly mandated a 1:40 pupil-teacher ratio, facilities within a 1-kilometer radius, and free textbooks for girls and SC/ST students. Ultimately, the 86th Constitutional Amendment inserted Article 21A, making free and compulsory elementary education a fundamental right for ages 6 to 14, effective April 1, 2010. Remember, though, preschooling for children under 6 remains a directive principle under Article 45, which requires your separate policy attention.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a direct administrative challenge. You've seen the constitutional mandates, the empirical data, and the strict legal structures. So how will you, as a future district educational officer, translate these rigid frameworks into the actual delivery of high-quality, equitable education in your own jurisdiction? Master these policies, uphold these standards, and you'll be fully equipped to lead our educational future.
Welcome, future educational administrators. Let's jump right into today's explainer. We are systematically mapping out the macro perspectives and multi-level control of school administration in India. As candidates for the tgpsc District Educational Officer examination, you must know the exact statutory frameworks, historical timelines, and operational mechanisms that define our educational management, from the national apex down to the village tier.
Our roadmap for this explainer covers 3 distinct tiers. First, macro and national agencies. Second, state and district administration. And finally, grassroots and local governance.
Section 1. Macro and national agencies. We'll start by defining the overarching categories of school management and the apex bodies dictating macro-level policy.
School management in India structurally falls into 4 exact categories based on financial control and establishment. First, we have government schools. These are financed, operated, and controlled entirely by state or central departments, utilizing standard provincial cadre. Next, local body schools, run by elected local authorities like Zilla Parishads and municipalities, funded by local revenues and devolved state plans. Then there are aided schools. These have private everyday management by trusts or societies, but they receive state government grants in aid that strictly cover salaries and operational costs, binding them to state regulations. Finally, private, unaided schools. These rely entirely on self-financed pupil tuition fees, receiving absolutely zero government grants. They enjoy high functional autonomy, but they still must comply with state board affiliation criteria.
This macrostructure operates under joint legislative responsibility driven by a massive administrative pivot, the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976, which formally moved education to the concurrent list. Mapping the chronological establishment of these autonomous national agencies, we begin with CBSE. Established as a self-financing board in 1929, it grants affiliations and conducts public exams. NCRT followed in 1961 to advise the government on curriculum research and qualitative changes. NUEPA was established just a year later, in 1962, for apex-level capacity building and educational planning across its 9 academic departments. Later, specialized school systems were introduced, KVS in 1965 and NVS in 1986.
Looking at the operational specifics, you need to memorize the precise statutory mandates for these institutions. Kendriya Vidyalaya maintain a unified bilingual syllabus in Hindi and English, specifically designed for the children of transferable central government and defense employees. Navodaya Vidyalayas, chaired by the HRD minister, manage fully residential schools that enforce a strict 75% rural and 33% female reservation to promote talented rural youth. Additionally, the National Institute of Open Schooling, or NIOS, provides a flexible, non-formal, open distance learning stage, operating as a primary vehicle for universal schooling access.
Moving to Section 2, State and District Administration. Here, we transition down the hierarchy to state-level control and the pivotal district-level administration, where policy execution actually takes place.
State-level qualitative improvement is driven by specialized autonomous bodies. The School Education Board, or SEB, regulates public examinations and outlines student admission criteria. Then we have SCERT, formed in April 1979 by merging the State Institute of Education and the Science Institute. SCERT acts as the single largest catalytic resource agency for syllabus restructuring, pre-service and in-service training, and action research. Next, SIEMA-T was explicitly developed to train senior supervisors in microplanning and database management. And finally, SIET operates as the Apex Institute for Educational Technology, handling the production and evaluation of multimedia software.
The definitive perspective on administration is captured by the Qatari Commission, which classified the district education officer's domain as a mini-directorate. By emphasizing that the entire execution structure of the education department rests on this critical unit, the Commission formally identified the district as the most viable planning and administrative hub for school education. This decentralized approach was later formally adopted following the Hanumantarao Committee recommendations in the 1980s.
As a Class 1 state service officer, the district education officer executes 4 rigid operational duties, and you must know these inside out. Academically, the DEO is required to personally inspect exactly 5% of secondary schools annually. Administratively, they handle personnel management. This means the appointment, promotion, and cadre transfers of subordinate staff. For planning and statistics, the DEO compiles local village and block data to propose the opening or upgradation of schools based on grassroots demand. And financially, they prepare detailed budget estimates, audit expenditures, and execute monthly account reconciliation.
To support the DEO academically, the system relies on DYEO. The District Institute of Education and Training is a centrally sponsored pace-setting institute headed by a principal. The DYEO serves as the strict academic and resource support base for the district. Their statutory mandate includes conducting pre-service and in-service training for elementary teachers, surveying local educational needs, and performing localized action research to evaluate and systematically improve pedagogic quality at the grassroots level.
Finally, Section 3, Grassroots and Local Governance. Our structural descent reaches the ground level, analyzing the sub-district structures and grassroots Panchayati Raj institutions that interface directly with the community.
A major shift in operational strategy occurred under the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. The 10-10 rule mandated the creation of one block resource center and one cluster resource center for every 8 to 10 schools or villages. Why does this matter? Because this explicit numerical ratio shifted the sub-district focus directly away from administrative policing and inspection, moving instead toward providing regular, on-site pedagogic support, material preparation, and monthly teacher training.
Democratic decentralization was legally defined by the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments into highly specific operational tiers. The Zilla Parishad operates at the district level, utilizing a standing committee on education to manage secondary educational funds and propose new resources, like an educational cess. Below that, the Panchayat Samiti functions at the block level to supervise school plan construction and enforce state regulations. The Gram Panchayat coordinates local community contributions and supervises primary schools right at the village level. And in urban zones, municipalities, governed by elected mayors, handle the recruitment of municipal teachers and the administration of urban school finances.
Operating directly at the school tier is the Village Education Committee, formed by the local panchayat. Structured as a composite body including headmasters, parents, and ward members, and requiring no elections for its formation, the VEC executes highly precise grassroots functions. They conduct systematic house-to-house surveys, execute local school mapping, rigorously monitor daily teacher attendance, and carry the statutory responsibility to drive an exact 100% student enrollment while actively checking dropout rates.
So, as a future educational administrator, how will you utilize this exact multi-level governance framework, spanning from national mandates down to localized village mapping, to enforce absolute accountability and statutory compliance within your designated district? Understanding these precise administrative structures is the absolute foundation of effective educational leadership. Ensure you master these functional layers before you sit for your examination.
Welcome to This Explainer. You know, it's a given that schools are these massive, complex social organizations, right? They've got clear goals, identifiable personnel, specific instructional technology, which is really just a fancy way of saying pedagogy, and explicit positional roles. Ultimately, they are the spaces we dedicate entirely to student learning. But there's this really striking paradox right at the heart of educational management that we need to talk about right out of the gate.
And it's this. Schools are designed for student learning, absolutely. But do schools themselves actually learn? It's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? Take a second to think about your own institution. We kind of just assume that because a building is full of learning, the organization itself must be learning too. But as our source material highlights, a lot of schools just function as isolated little components stuck under one common roof. When reforms do happen, they usually just tweak one tiny part, and before you know it, the rest of the organization pulls that part right back into its old shape. Schools that truly transform themselves do something different. They engage in systematic, collaborative problem-solving.
Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we're following a really practical 6-part roadmap to take us from high-level management philosophy down to concrete administrative action. We'll hit 1. The learning organization, 2. New roles of leadership, 3. Building vision and mission, 4. Institutional development planning, 5. The 6-step IDP process, and finally, 6. Empowering teachers and resources. Chapter 1. The learning organization. Now, taking a step back to look at the macro perspective, Peter Senge has this brilliant concept of the learning organization. And what's really interesting here is that he doesn't define it just by a school's ability to survive. Senge makes a sharp distinction between adaptive learning, which is basically just keeping your head above water day to day, and generative learning, which actually builds your creative capability. So a true learning organization is a place where people are continually expanding their capacity to create the exact results they actually desire. To make that happen, Senge identifies 5 crucial disciplines, and systems thinking is the absolute cornerstone of the whole thing. It literally forces us to shift our mindset from looking at isolated parts to seeing the whole picture. Why is this so absolutely crucial? Because without it, administrators tend to fall back on simplistic, quick fixes. Take budget cuts, for example. Slashing the teacher training budget gives you an instant cash win today. But systemically, it causes massive long-term structural decay by degrading instruction and teacher motivation. Or think about caving to pressure and admitting unqualified students. You won't see the damage instantly, but the delayed consequences will absolutely wreck your academic standards down the line. Systems thinking says no way. It demands that decision-making is spread across all stakeholder groups, and only after really thorough dialogue. Building right on top of that cornerstone, Senge gives us 4 more disciplines. First is personal mastery. This is all about continually clarifying your personal vision, but the catch is it has to be self-directed. You can't just force everyone into some mandatory training program and call it mastery. It's more like providing substitute cover so a teacher can go observe a program they're genuinely passionate about. Then there's mental models. This means actively testing our internal assumptions through team conversations, like changing how we view an erring pupil into a developmental opportunity instead of just a discipline problem. Next up is building shared vision. This is about co-creating a picture of the future that fosters true commitment, not just forced compliance to some top-down mandate. And finally, team learning. This aligns everyone's capacities through real dialogue, where people suspend their assumptions and literally think together. Chapter 2. New Roles of Leadership. So if a school is going to actually function systemically, it completely upends the fundamental role of the principal or leader. The old school view of a leader as this lone hero calling all the shots, that is deeply non-systemic. Instead, Senjay introduces 3 totally new dimensions. First, the leader as designer. This is the behind-the-scenes work, designing the policies and governing ideas that actually facilitate learning. Second, the leader as steward, meaning you don't own the vision, you protect it. You act as the steward of the collective purpose, stories for the benefit of everyone. And third, the leader as teacher. Now, this doesn't mean micromanaging how people do their jobs. It means fostering learning and helping everyone define reality, managing that creative tension between where the school is right now and where it wants to be. Chapter 3. Building Vision and Mission. So how does a leader actually build that collective path forward? You hear vision and mission thrown around like corporate buzzwords all the time, but there is a massive structural difference between the two. Think of it this way. The vision is your destination. It has to be this compelling, attractive, totally credible mental image of a desirable future. It's the spark for that long-term commitment we just talked about. The mission, on the other hand, is the specific vehicle that gets you there. It's a concrete statement defining exactly what the school is trying to accomplish, who it's for, and how you're going to do it. You literally need the abstract inspiration of the vision to translate into the concrete, classroom-applicable practices of the mission. Chapter 4. Institutional Development Planning. All right, once you have that vision and mission locked in, how do you actually turn it into administrative action? Well, the answer is Institutional Development Planning, or IDP. And the underlying philosophy here is just fantastic. As E.W. Franklin put it, the teacher is the kingpin, asked to act as the planner and executor of educational improvement. I love that word, kingpin. It represents a massive shift. It means effective planning can't just be some centralized, top-down decree. It has to be a bottom-up reality, where teachers themselves are planning based on the actual, felt needs of their own classrooms. To put that into perspective, let's contrast IDP with traditional management. Traditional management is usually all top-down mandates. It's totally expenditure-oriented, which means constantly asking for more grants and basically forcing compliance. The IDP approach is the exact opposite. It's bottom-up and it's deeply cooperative. Most importantly, it shifts the entire mindset to economy orientation. That means optimizing and squeezing the absolute most value out of the physical, human, and community resources you already have, all driven by a shared vision. Chapter 5. The 6-step IDP process. Let's move to the actual mechanism of action and see how this builds step by step. It's a highly scientific process. Step 1 is diagnosis. This is a realistic assessment of your achievements and constraints using hard local data. Step 2 is target setting. You have to express your targets in measurable phased numbers. No vague goals here. Step 3 is intervention strategies. This means breaking those big strategies down into concrete daily tasks and programs. Step 4 is costing and budgeting, where you detail out your recurring versus non-recurring requirements. Step 5 is your implementation schedule. Set strict timetables and monitor them closely. And finally, Step 6 is negotiations and approval, where you review the feasibility with the higher-ups and finalize everything based on your actual budget ceilings. Chapter 6. Empowering Teachers and Resources. So the crucial point in executing this whole plan comes down to resources. And here is a wild fact. More than 90% of school budgets are eaten up by teachers' salaries alone. 90%. If almost your entire budget is tied up in human capital, then it goes without saying that the success of any educational reform depends entirely on how well you manage your people. And you definitely cannot manage that human capital with basic administrative policing. You have to genuinely empower those kingpins of your school. Our source material highlights 4 dimensions to get this right. First is worthwhileness. Teachers need to be actively involved in actual policymaking. Second is independence. Give them the autonomy to experiment and innovate in their space. Third is continuous professional development, or CPD, but it has to be practical, classroom-applicable training, not just theory. And fourth is recognition. We have to replace seniority-only promotions with objective social awards that actually recognize outstanding practice. Of course, human resources need proper physical resources to actually thrive. The physical plant of the school literally sets the climate for learning. There are 3 core principles for administrators to keep in mind here. Curriculum adequacy means the buildings must efficiently host all co-curricular and community activities. Safety and well-being is about nailing the basics, best practices in ventilation, lighting, and sanitation. And then there's interfunctional coordination, which is just common sense spatial planning, like deliberately positioning the loud zones far away from the quiet zones, so you aren't creating a massive administrative headache every Tuesday afternoon. Bringing this all together means you are going to face some very specific managerial challenges. Conflicts are going to happen. It's inevitable. To handle interpersonal conflicts, say the friction of promoting one teacher over another, you should lean on a 7-step systems approach to resolve it systemically rather than treating it like a personal spat. On top of that, leaders need to actively build strong school-community rapport to leverage outside resources. And, crucially, they need to formulate a rock-solid school disaster management plan to protect the whole ecosystem. Which brings us to the end of our explainer. We've covered a ton of ground today, going from the high-level philosophy of systems thinking all the way down to where to put the noisy classrooms. But let me leave you with this final thought. How do you propose to achieve your personal vision as a school leader? Are you just surviving the day-to-day grind? Or are you ready to use these site-based planning tools to ensure your institution is truly continuously learning? Take these concepts back to your own school. Look at the systems you have in place and ask yourself, what kind of generative learning can we spark today?